So today we are going to look at diversity of matter. Specifically, we'll look at materials. And the topic for today is general properties of metals. By the end of this lesson, we should be able to explain what metals are. We should be able to identify the 4 major properties of metals. We should be able to classify materials into metals and non-metals. We should be able to explain why metals are used for different purposes. And you should also be able to design a simple object using metal. What is a metal? Metals are naturally occurring materials or elements that are usually hard, strong, shiny, and good conductors of heat and electricity. Metals can also be shaped into different forms without breaking, making them very useful for making everyday objects. A metal is a material that is usually hard, shiny, strong, can be shaped, and allow heat and electricity to pass through them. For example, iron, gold, silver, copper, aluminum, and zinc. So metals can be used to make cooking pots. Metals can also be used to make spoons. It can also be used for farm tools. We can also use metal for bridges. Metals can also be used to make coins. We can also use metal to make jewelry. We can also use metal for roofing sheets. We can also use metals to make gates. Metals can also be used to make vehicles. Now let's look at the general properties of metals. Lustre. This means that metals have shiny surfaces, and therefore lustre shows the way in which metals reflect light. Examples of metals that have this property are gold necklace, silver spoon, aluminum pot. Malleability. This means that metals can be hammered or rolled into sheets without breaking. So examples of some metals that have this property are aluminum roofing sheets, aluminum foil, car body panels. Conductivity. Conductivity means metals allow heat and electricity to pass through them. Examples of such metals are copper wires, electric cables, as well as cooking pots. Ductility. Ductility means that metals can be drawn into wires. Examples: you can use metals to make telephone wires, electric wires, as well as internet cables. High density is also another property of metals. High density means that Metals are heavy for their size because their particles are packed closely together. For example, iron is heavier than wood of the same size, and lead is very heavy. So as you can see, iron can be used to build houses, and lead can be used to make chains. And as you can see, chains are very heavy. Another property of metals is that they are usually solid at room temperature. This means that metals remain solid under normal room conditions. Example, iron, gold, copper, and aluminum. All these metals remain solid under normal room conditions. Another property of metal is that metals are opaque as a thin sheet. The metal is opaque as a thin sheet. This means that even when metals are made into very thin sheets, you cannot see through them because they block light. For example, aluminum foil and thin iron sheets. These are all metals that are made into very thin sheets, and yet you cannot see through them. Sonorous. Sonorous is another property of metal, which means that metals produce a clear ringing sound when they are struck. This means that when you strike a metal, it makes a clear ringing sound. Example, we have school bell, church bell, the gong, as well as the metal triangle used in music. Let's look at some properties of non-metals. Non-metals are dull. And why do we say that? They are dull because they do not have a shiny surface. For example, coal, rubber, wood, and plastic do not have shiny surface. Therefore, they are dull. Why is this useful to know? Because plastic and rubber are used to cover electrical wires to protect people from electric shocks. Another property of non-metal is that they are poor conductors of heat and electricity. This means that non-metals do not allow heat or electricity to pass through them easily. Now, examples of some of these non-metals are plastic, rubber, wood, and glass. Why is this useful? Because some of such non-metals can be used to cover electric wires to protect people from electric shock. Non-metals are non-ductile, which means that they cannot be drawn into wires. This means that you cannot split them individually into wires. Example, plastic, sulfur, wood. These are all non-metals that you cannot stretch into wires. The moment you try to stretch them into wires, they will break or change shape instead. Another property of non-metals is that they are brittle, which means that they can break or shatter easily when hit. So examples of such non-metals are charcoal and sulfur. Unlike metals, they cannot be bent into shape. Let's look at another non-metallic property. Non-metals may be solids, liquids, or gases at room temperature. So non-metals can exist in all three states. When they are solids, they can be carbon or sulfur. When they are liquid, it can be bromine, and bromine is the only common liquid non-metal. In the case of being gases, they can be oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen, and carbon dioxide. Another property of non-metals is that it is transparent as thin sheet. This means that non-metal materials can be made into thin sheets that allow light to pass through them so that objects behind them can be seen. Let's look at some examples. Clear plastic sheet and glass sheet. Although glass is not an element, it is a non-metallic material. Non-metals are not sonorous. This means that they do not produce a ringing sound when they are struck. For example, plastic, wood, and rubber, when struck, make a dull sound or a soft sound. Now let's summarize all that we have learned so far. Appearance. Metals are shiny or lustrous, but non-metals are dull. In terms of conductivity, metals are good conductors of heat and electricity. However, non-metals are poor conductors of heat and electricity. Melting point. Metals usually require high melting point, but non-metals require lower melting point. Density. Metals usually are high in density. That means that they are heavier than other materials. However, non-metals are usually low in density, meaning that they are lighter. Malleability. This means that metals can be hammered into sheets. However, non-metals cannot be hammered into sheets. In terms of ductility, metals can be drawn into wires. However, non-metals cannot be drawn into wires. When it comes to the state at room temperature, metals are mostly solid. However, non-metals may be solid, liquid, or gases. When it comes to transparency, metals are opaque. This means that you cannot see through metals. But when it comes to non-metals, some of them can be transparent when they are thin. Now, when it comes to sound, metals are sonorous. This means that they ring when they are struck. Let's take this assignment. Classify the list below into metals and non-metals. Also, attempt these assessment questions. See you next time. Bye bye.